I wanted to thank Jemmy so much for taking this exhibition, and I want to thank Leah once again. She said some really sweet things at the opening, and we are going to end up having somewhat of a dialogue, which I hope you will all feel comfortable in joining in. It's kind of, this is the first time I've had this experience to actually give a talk at a survey show, and I have to just tell this one little story. I've been calling this show a survey show for a couple of years, and a friend finally said, "Oh, for Christ's sake, Susan, just get over it. It's a retrospective." And I kind of said, but I don't feel old enough for a retrospective, so I'm sticking to the survey show thing. But as probably a lot of you know, because I think probably a lot of you are students, that when you have visiting artists, they usually give a talk and they will show their work over a long period of time, and they will talk about the development of their work and the kind of content that they were working with over a long period of time. But it's a bit a different situation because all the old work is here. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's not here, but you really do have an overview of what I've been up to in the studio for the last 30 years. And if you've read the catalog essay, then you know that Sue Gibson Garvey writes as eloquently as she does with so much insight. She's a person I've worked with on and off for years, and she writes in a way that I just leaves me breathless. So it's been a real pleasure to work with her. So when it came to thinking about what kind of talk I might give, I was kind of left with, well, there's no sense showing images because they're here, and you've got Sue's article. And so I thought, well, maybe we could have something that was a bit more informal. I want to tell you a few things about myself that aren't in the catalog and you might not necessarily know. And that Leah and I are going to have a conversation, and one in which I hope you feel comfortable joining in. I would like to start by saying that for me, being here tonight is a sense of coming full circle. I sat just like you many years ago listening to lots of artist presentations. I also sat at that desk, but it used to be there because I worked weekends as the art gallery attendant. So my years at Mount A were important, mostly fun, lots of hard work. But Mount Allison has a very, I have to say, special place in my heart. And so to be here again all these years later, it is very special. So I'm very happy to be here. But the one thing that probably hardly anybody knows is that the reason I actually came to Mount A is because of Owen's Art Gallery. I grew up in Amherst, and I used to teach swimming for the local YMCA, and we would use Mount Allison pool because in those days Amherst didn't have a pool. And the instructors got to drive over with the director of the swim program, so we didn't have to go on the bus with a bunch of unruly 12-year-olds. And he had a meeting one day, and so we came over early. There was typically at the end of the afternoon when school was finished. So we were about an hour early, and I thought, what am I going to do for an hour in Sackville? And I thought, oh, I know, I'll go into the Owens Art Gallery. And my parents had brought me here as a child. And I came into the gallery, and there was a painting exhibition by Bruno Bobak. I don't know how many of you know Bruno Bobak's work. He's Polish originally. He lives in Fredericton and has for decades, years and years. And Bruno, I think, is into his 90s now. So that would have been somewhere in the 60s, late 60s. We could probably go back into the archives and figure out the date. But Bruno paints, or he did paint, he still does, in a very, what I would call German expressionistic kind of way. They're figurative, and so they're kind of these tortured figures and so on and so forth. Now, as a 15 or 16-year-old from Amherst, I'd never heard of German expressionist. I had never seen paintings like this in my life. I mean, there were a bunch of naked people doing all kinds of like weird and wonderful things. But I remember seeing that exhibition and thinking, oh, like I have to study painting. I just have to study painting. And I was a kid that had grown up always interested in art and always thinking that, oh, maybe someday if I'm really lucky, I'll study art. But I have to say, seeing that exhibition in this gallery space made me say to myself, Susan, you're going to art school. So that's how I ended up, particularly at Mount A. Plus, my parents thought it was a better choice than NASCAD. And the odd irony is, of course, I teach at NASCAD now. And when I became a student here and had to draw for 3 years, they weren't drawing at NASCAD. But trust me, we're drawing at NASCAD now. So that's just kind of sets the picture for why I perhaps even in some ways feel a little emotional about this place. But I have to say that it is a real pleasure being here. That's about as much as I'm actually going to say. I am going to do one reading, so I hope you don't mind, bear with. But it's, you may be familiar with John Berger. When I was an art student, of course, the book we all read was called Ways of Seeing. He's an art critic. He's also writes fiction. But I don't know if many people know that he's also an avid draftsman. He draws, loves drawing, and he writes about drawing in an amazingly beautiful and poetic way. And I very recently bought this brand new book by John Berger. It just came out in 2011, and he actually does this really beautiful thing about talking about the philosopher Spinoza and also drawing, and he does this really wonderful kind of overlay, and it's what I love about his work and his writing, because I'm an artist who works with overlays. I work with collage and piling up things, and I've always loved the process of drawing, and I'm sure we'll get into that conversation. But I read this, it's just a couple of pages, but I think he describes a process of drawing in a way that I think is quite beautiful. So bear with, I'm just going to do this short reading. I'm drawing some irises which are growing against the south wall of a house. They are about 1 meter tall, but beginning to be in full bloom. They are somewhat bent over by the weight of their flowers. There are 4 to a stalk. The sun is shining, and it's the month of May. All the snow at altitudes less than 1,500 meters has melted. Just a little footnote, John Berger lives full-time in France now. I think these irises are of a variety called copper luster. Their colors are dark crimson brown, yellow, white, copper, the colors of the instruments of a brass band being played with abandon. Their stalks and sepals are a pale viridian. I'm drawing with black ink, Schaefer, and wash and spit, using my finger rather than a brush. Beside me on the grass where I'm sitting are a few sheets of colored Chinese rice paper. I chose them for their cereal colors. Maybe later I will tear shapes from them and use them as a collage. I have a glue stick if need be. There's also on the grass a bright yellow oil pastel taken from a pastel kit made for school kids with the trade name Giotto. The drawn flowers look as though they're going to be half life-size. You lose your sense of time when you're drawing. You are so concentrated on scales of space. I've probably been drawing for about 40 minutes, maybe longer. Irises grew in Babylon. Their name came later from the Greek goddess of the rainbow. The French fleur-de-lis was an iris. The blossoms occupy the top half of the paper, and the stems force their way upwards through the bottom half. The stems aren't quite vertical. They lean to the right. At a certain moment, if you don't decide to abandon a drawing in order to begin another, the looking involved in what you are measuring and summing up changes. At first you question the model, i.e. the 7 irises, in order to discover lines, shapes, tones that you can trace on the paper. The drawing accumulates the answers. Also, of course, it accumulates corrections. After further questioning of the first answers, drawing is always correcting. I'm beginning now to use the Chinese papers. They turn the ink lines into veins. At a certain moment, if you're lucky, the accumulation becomes an image. That's to say, it stops being a heap of signs and becomes a presence. Uncouth, but a presence. This is when your looking changes. You start questioning the presence as much as the model. How is it asking to be altered so as to become less uncouth? You stare at the drawing and repeatedly glance at the 7 irises to look, not at their structure this time, but at what is radiating out from them, at their energy. How do they interact with the air around them, with the sunshine, with the warmth reflected off the wall of the house? Drawing now involves subtracting as much as adding. It involves the paper as much as the forms drawn on it. I use razor blade, pencil, yellow crayon, spit. I can't hurry. I'm taking my time, as if I had all the time in the world. I do have all the time in the world. And with this belief, I continue making the minimal corrections one after another, and then another, in order to make the presence of the 7 irises a little more comfortable and so more evident. All the time in the world. In fact, I have to deliver the drawing tonight. I have made it for Marie Claude, who died 2 days ago, aged 58, of a heart attack. Tonight, the drawing will be in the church somewhere near her coffin. The coffin will be open for those who want to see her for the last time. Her funeral is tomorrow. Then the drawing, rolled up and tied with a ribbon, will be placed with live flowers in her coffin and be buried with her. We who draw do so not only to make something visible to others, but also to accompany something invisible to its incalculable destination. I have brought samples of paper because I typically work on paper that I order and buy from other places because it's not easy. I can't even buy it in Halifax. So I think my relationship with paper has developed over years. My undergraduate degree and my graduate degree are actually both in painting. But I stopped painting at one point. It wasn't an overnight kind of thing. It just gradually stopped and the drawing took over. And when I first started, I did the large-scale drawings, the Devil's Purse drawings. But as I went on and began to do more collage, I started to work with some Japanese papers, which are technically called washi. I think it's one of those things is that as our careers go on or our lives go on, we start following certain paths. I mean, at the point you perhaps, you're doing a wide spectrum of things, as I was when I was a student. I mean, I did sculpture, I did painting, I did photography, I did printmaking. And it was later, after I finished with both undergraduate and graduate school, that I became increasingly fascinated with drawing. And as the more I drew, the more I was interested in the substrate that I actually worked on. So I started to search out actually high quality papers. So now I only work on handmade papers, which means they're all individually pulled, or I work on mold-made papers, which are made with machines, but they're still, we use all of this language. We call them rag papers, or we call them acid-free papers, which simply means that they're pH neutral papers. And rag papers means that they're primarily cotton-based papers versus, like cellulose, although there's now combination papers. And I think the reason I became more interested in that is because drawing is something of an offside thing in a way. It's not, well, certainly when I went through art school, it was something we were all expected to do, but it's not one of the you're not like a painter or a sculptor or whatever. Oh, well, you draw, everybody draws. And I liked the peripheral conceptual thing about drawing. But I also, because I do images of things that have some sense of fragility, ephemerality, vulnerability, paper also has all of those attributes. Although papers can last a long, long time if properly cared for, just like your tulip bulbs can keep coming up, quite frankly, long after you're dead. So I liked that overlap of kind of what I was working with conceptually, and also then the material to me that I was using in some way reflected or paralleled what my content is. So it's called kind of bringing form and content together and overlapping them. So when I start going with paper, you have to tell me to shut up.
This is like a paper cooking show.
Because and you can, okay, now we'll come to the paper table. So you can certainly come up, and I will. You can. So I'm going to tell you one story about one piece, one sort of paper, just to give you some sort of thing. So this is a paper called Murat, and it's made in Spain. And when my teacher, friend, mentor died, I inherited his estate. He lived in Spain, and amongst, I don't know, a lifetime of being a pack rat, he had mountains of beautiful paper. And this is one paper he had. And you can't actually buy it really anywhere but one place. So we live in the age of the internet. So I had a bunch of this stuff after Stephen Andrews died, and I thought, I want to get more of this paper. I'll Google, and I'll go online, and I'll find who sells this in Canada or the States or somewhere. Nobody sold it anywhere. I couldn't find it. I could hardly find a mention of it. So I thought, maybe they don't make it anymore. Then my youngest son went to Spain as an exchange student. He lived in northern Spain. He met some artists. He asked them about this paper, and they went, oh yeah, we've heard of that paper, but I don't know where you'd ever buy it. So we go to visit Aiden in Spain. We go to Madrid because I'd never been to the Prado. I wanted to go to the Prado. And I thought, okay, we fly out tomorrow. I'm going to find this paper. I got to find this paper. So we asked at the hotel. I said, hey, we're talking Madrid. It's a big city. So I asked at the hotel desk. Luckily, Aiden is fluent Spanish by now, so he can translate for me. I said, I'm looking for this art paper. And the guy's, like, his eyes glaze over, like, oh my God. Like, art stores. Like, people don't go to Madrid to go to art stores. But he did say most of the art stores are located up around the Prado. Fine, let's go to the Prado. It was Monday. We'd gotten into the Prado on Sunday. Monday, we fly out Tuesday. So we go up, taxi, just drop us off in the vicinity. So it drops us in front of a cafe. So, okay, now we're going to start searching for paper. My husband thinks I'm nuts, and my son is getting a little fed up with this. But I'm dogged. No, we're going to find this paper. So we go into a lovely sidewalk cafe. We have a glass of wine. And then I say, okay, where do we go, guys? And my husband was sitting there, and he went, that street. We're going to walk down that street. And I went, that street? He went, yeah, got a good feeling about that street. So we start walking down this little alleyway, and I go, this street? Anyways, there's an art store, because it's got one of those little wooden mannequins, you know, like there are in all art stores everywhere. And so we go in there, Aiden, ask the guy, this is the paper I want. So Aiden goes, blah, 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 blah. And the guy goes, no. And I'm going, oh, he doesn't have the paper. And he goes, but one block down. So we go one block down, and we have to buzz to be let in. And Aiden goes, blah, 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 blah. My mother's looking for blah, blah, blah. And she goes, oh, see? She is the only outlet for this paper in the entire world. I'm not kidding. So I'm thinking, Stephen, what are you, clairvoyant or something? Anyways, I'm working back and forth between Aiden and this woman, and she's very friendly. And so she shows me the shelves, and there's like a few sketchbooks and a few little pieces. And I'm going, well, I want bigger stuff. I want more stuff. So Aiden goes, my mother wants lots of paper. So she goes, oh, see? So we go downstairs where their warehouse is, and there is stacks and stacks of this stuff. So I start hauling it out, and she's going, so much paper. Anyways, and so then she makes a little cardboard portfolio, and I buy hundreds of dollars worth of paper, and she gives me her card, and we have a lovely conversation. By now I think I'm speaking Spanish. I'm fluent, and we're bonded for life. And so this is the paper. And coming back through customs, the wonderful thing about customs people, they have no comprehension about how much paper costs. So the guy says, so what do you got in the portfolio? And I said, a few sheets of paper. And he burst out laughing and he goes, I can't buy paper in Canada? So I never had to admit how much I spent on paper. But anyways, so this is the Spanish paper. So you see, so I go to great lengths, and that's another sheet of Spanish paper. All the papers in this pile are handmade papers. And a lot of you who are artists will know that they all have watermarks. And out of the work that, all the stuff that I inherited from Stephen Andrews, I have these wonderful Whatman watercolor papers, and in the watermark it actually tells the date. So this paper was made in 1949. And I actually have a piece that was made in 1953, which was the year that I was born. So I'm waiting for a special project for that piece. So this pile is handmade papers, and you're allowed to feel them.
They're really nice.
They are really beautiful. And these two sheets here are they're mold-made papers, still really good papers. And what I've put here are the Japanese papers, the washi I use, and when you look at them or feel them, you'll see that how thin they are. They use totally different fibers than we use in Western paper making. And it's the reason why I can do collage and you never see an edge. When people look at my drawings, sometimes they go, how did you do that watercolor wash? And I said, it's not a watercolor wash, it's a piece of Japanese washi. And I buy all of this from the Japanese paper place in Toronto. Anyways, I'm not going to talk about paper anymore because I could go on and on, but I won't. With observational drawing, as a student at Mount A in the early 70s, not like NASCAD, we were expected to draw. Drawing wasn't an option. We had to draw for 3 years, and there was an open life drawing session every Friday afternoon because we had no classes on Friday. And in fourth year, you could stop taking drawing. But it was just this expectation that you drew, and of course you were taught how to do observational drawing. You were taught, all that stuff like line and tone and positive, negative, and how to build space and so on and so forth. And so it was just something I'd always done. And then I didn't do it for a number of years because I did large paintings and textured sorts of things and stuff. But how I went back to it was actually because of one of those. We were living in Calgary. I'd been at the Banff Centre, I was living in Calgary, had gone to graduate school, graduated. I was teaching at the Alberta College of Art. And we came, as all good Maritimers do, you come home every summer, right? That's what you do. And you go to the beach, because they don't have any beaches in Alberta. That's one of the big downfalls of that province, actually. Wouldn't be a bad place otherwise. So we were at Shediac, which is where my husband had grown up being on the beach. I had grown up closer to here. And a nephew collected like a fistful of these devil's purses. And I didn't know they were called there. That's a Newfoundland phrase. They're also called mermaid's purses. They are actually skate, the fish, you know, the big kind of flatfish thing. It's actually egg casings. They actually lay these eggs, and they're like a chicken egg. They actually have a yolk, and the little fish grows and hatches out. So what you find on the beach often are ones that have, you know, they're kind of busted up, and once the fish hatches, like these tendrils hold on to seaweed, and then they get tossed up and they get tangled up in seaweed. Anyways, Nick had brought, and he said, Auntie Susie, would you like these? And I just, like, this shape just hit me. It was like, when you see an image and you think, oh my God, I have to make drawings of that. So I took them back to Calgary and I started drawing them. And I started drawing them, I thought, fairly big on full sheet Stonehenge, which is 38 by 50 inches. And for the first time in years, I went back to doing them really representationally. I'd stick one of those up on my drawing board and I'd draw the thing so it looked, so it had this form. Now, it's funny because I do think life imitates art. I started drawing these things and wasn't feeling so well. I went to the doctor and found out I was pregnant. And I kind of went, duh. Anyways, so lots of people have written about them and they've talked about the form and so on and so forth. But in the process of drawing those, I just got fascinated with the process of taking, I also obviously got interested in scale, because how do you take something that's this big and then make it 8 feet tall is what I ended up doing. And it actually ended up being a much bigger challenge than I thought it was. And but it took me back to observational drawing. And I have essentially ever since then drawn from actual things. So at the beach, I've been known as the woman who collects dead birds. So I have now a freezer full of dead birds because everybody brings me their dead birds. And my son the other day said, Mom, like, I'm trying to find something to make for supper. And like, can you just get rid of these damn dead birds? But I literally just, I just keep freezer blocks and I take them to the studio and put them on the desk, and because I don't want the bird on thaw, so I just put the dead bird on the freezer pack and draw the bird, and then I put it back in the freezer. And so far I've resisted Aiden's entreaties to throw my dead bird collection away. But that's what took me back to observational drawing, and I don't know, I just became so intrigued with the process of actually having to draw something that you see in front of you, especially if you're really shifting the scale. And there was a period that I did go to the Natural History Museum and I drew from their collection. So I drew dead birds from their collection. And, but it was really interesting because I went with a graduate student and we've become friends and colleagues really in a lot of ways. And so we would go to the museum one day a week with our paper and all our drawing material, and so we would get taken up into where they store all the birds. And I don't know how many people know, but natural history museums have huge collections of dead birds. I mean, you guys have a collection here, obviously, in the biology department. And so Catherine and I would go up, and Alex Wilson, who works, said, okay, so what do you want to draw today? And so we'd just start opening drawers, and we'd be, okay, I'm drawing a blue heron today, or I'm drawing. So we'd pick these birds out. But we kind of developed this relationship with the scientist. And one day Alex was saying that he told me this story. Is it true? I don't know. I like the story. But he said that in a lot of scientific illustration, they still get artists to draw. And there are programs, and I've had students from NASCAD go on to do medical drawing or medical image. I mean, they use computers as well as actual drawing. But Alex was telling me the story that he had gotten a student from NASCAD because he wanted the student to draw the insides of a very particular plant. So the student drew this, brought the drawing back, and Alex looked at it and goes, it's wrong. And the student said, what do you mean it's wrong? And he said, well, the inside of this plant is a perfect spiral. And the student, art student, looking at the scientist said, oh, excuse me, there are no perfect spirals in nature. To which the scientist replied, excuse me, there are. And so the student said, yeah, but I kind of wanted, to have a little artistic feel to it. To which Alex replied, I'm not looking for artistic feel. I'm looking for a precise drawing of the inside of the plant. And it struck me about that thing about drawing observationally as carefully as you can to try and give that sense. And what it is, when you maybe infuse, for someone like me, I love scientific drawings. I love botanicals. I love, Edward Lear and Audubon and all of that. But when you use it as I do, it's, yes, you use some of that, but there's also a process of interpretation, which I think makes it different. But I gotta say, I just fell in love with the process of observational drawing, and I just can't let go of it. So. I think it's because I'm going to go a bit tangential here for a moment, but and then I'll come back to the answer. Because it goes back to a bit about observational drawing. Because I've taught for a long, long time, I will often, and I teach at the first year level, foundation. I have taught upper level classes, but I have to say, teaching first year students is, a lot of faculty don't like it. It's one of my favorite places to teach. I just love teaching first year students. But I'll often tell students at all levels is that you come to art school with a big empty trunk. I mean, in the old days when you got sent off to university, you packed a trunk and you got delivered to your residence with your packed trunk with all your outfits or something. But I say with art students, in some ways, think about it metaphorically, you come with this big empty truck, and your job really as an art student is to just fill that trunk to bursting. You just take every course you can take, you go to every artist talk you can take, you try every media that comes, you just try everything. I know sometimes it can get a bit, oh God, like if I have to go to one more critique and but when you get out of art school, quite frankly, no one gives a shit whether you ever do another drawing. The only time that people really care is when you're in art school. And so it can get overbearing, but you should really milk everything out of that experience. And it's really interesting with, accepting current family here, but with friends and family, if they go, oh, so what are you doing? And you go, oh, I'm at art school. And they go, oh, isn't that lovely? And then you graduate. So you see this person, they go, what are you doing now? Oh, well, I'm finished with art school, and, well, I'm trying to, well, it's time to get a job, isn't it? So all of a sudden, it was okay to be in art school, but you get out of art school, well, you got to get a job, because that's what people do. And you're kind of going, yeah, but I want to make art. Oh, well, you've got student loans, and you've got, so the only time people really care about what you do is when you're a student. So really make the faculty work for their money. Email them at midnight. I'm really struggling with this drawing, and email means these days that we're only a click away. And then you go to graduate school and you stuff a bunch more stuff in that trunk. And then all of that stuff's behind you. And then you're alone in a studio somewhere and you got some crappy job to try and make some money. And then you're going, so how do I be an artist? What am I supposed to do now? So what you do is you go back to the trunk and you start to unpack it. And you go through all that stuff. And maybe you're left with this much, but that will be enough to carry you for the rest of your artistic life. But if you don't have a really full trunk, you don't get to sift through a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm not trying to make Leah's job more difficult. So,
Just made it easier. Like, listen to it.
I'm telling you, I run into, in Halifax, because I've been teaching there for so long, of course I bump into ex-students all the time, and it's the hateful question. And it hangs in the air like a miasma. So are you still painting? Well, no, I got this job in the bank, and then, well, I wanted to get married, and we wanted to have this nice wedding, and it's 10 years later, and oh, but I don't worry, Susan, I'm going to get back to painting. You know, so now I try not to ask the question. If they volunteer the information, that's great. It's a dreadful, dreadful question to ask somebody. No, I'm selling shoes, you know, or whatever. So not a bad way to go through life. It probably pays more. But so I think what happened to me is that it was not until I started drawing those that it sounds really cliche, but it wasn't until I started drawing those devil's purse that, quote, I found my voice. And I found what it was that interested me. And as a very good friend who's a very good artist said to me, you know, Susan, really, we just have one idea our whole life, and we just keep trying to say it better. And I have to agree with her, because I think if you go through my work, it changes, it's this, it's that. But in all of the work is a consistent kind of interest, and it comes from the natural world, because of course the natural world is about death and renewal, like your tulip bulbs. Looks like they die every year, but they come back every year, and then they die and they come back. So it's a process. It helped that I married a biologist, because I never took biology, so I could always get lots of answers from him. But I think there is in the natural world things that mirror what I'm interested in that bigger kind of world of meaning or concept or what motivates me. And for whatever reason, images generally from the natural world that have a sense of change, fragility, ephemerality, vulnerability, is what always attracts me. Of all the things I could draw, those are the things I want to draw. I think they're great. I mean, I can go to drawing exhibitions, and, you know, I think as people who have studied art for many years and try and get out and see art and keep abreast with what's happening, I can certainly look at work and understand its place in a contemporary art world, and I can appreciate that, but I can still not like it. So there's certainly, you know, I do see drawing that doesn't appeal to me hugely, but I could say that about any kind of area, really. What I think is so interesting is that I have seen in the years that I have been drawing go from that sense of the preliminary sketch to something that becomes what your studio practice is. So when people say, what do you do? I say, well, my studio practice is drawing. That's what I do. I draw. I don't draw in preparation for something else. I simply draw. So I think in the contemporary world, I love the proliferation of drawing. And, you know, some of the people whose work I really like, they do big installation drawings. Drawings come off the wall. But it's still rooted in the hand doing drawing. And one thing I always come back to with drawing, and I use it in teaching, but often when I teach my first drawing class, I'll start showing them, and I'll show them those, you know, famous drawings from, you know, Lascaux or wherever. But there's that wonderful drawing of a hand that someone's, you know, like covered with red oxide and plastered against a stone wall. And, you know, how many millennia ago was that? But I think what I love about drawing is that you see the hand. And I often tell students, if you look really closely, you can sometimes see the first mark maybe they made and the last mark. And I think drawing in some way does strip away a certain often a sense of history. So I can look at a Rembrandt, really kind of almost a gesture drawing of a sitting girl, and if it wasn't for the clothes she had on, that drawing could have been made yesterday. So I think what I love, and I think it's a very contemporary notion in some ways, but I just like often in drawing the sense of the collapse of time. It's not so historically positioned as oftentimes painting or sculpture or obviously architecture might be. So, and I guess it has, so the downside of that is that it's always been this kind of other thing. I mean, really, I mean, you look at some drawings and you wouldn't know if it was done in the 1600s, the 1700s, or yesterday. And so I like that about drawing, but I do like the fact that there's a lot more drawing now, and I find it interesting as the world becomes more technological in some ways. There seems this desire amongst artists and certainly students to do, I find with students this interesting thing about they want to still learn how to draw, and they still want to do something with the hand, and they want to be able to, you know, do that charcoal thing and see the mark they made. And so you know, we do talk about it as mark making, but I think there is a way that humans do have a desire, and we've had it, I think, for as long as, maybe we had it when we were still on all fours, but I'm no anthropologist, but I think there's always been that desire to make some kind of mark. And I always say with students, and I think oftentimes students struggle with drawing because they can't, I always say in drawing class, you can't hide. I mean, I come out of a painting tradition, so excuse me, but you know, if you got a painting, you got color and texture and you know, all that stuff. But when you come to do a figure drawing, you got a scrap of newsprint and a stick of charcoal. And I actually think drawing is the most conceptual thing that artists do, because you try and take this big whole three-dimensional world and you're trying to put it on a two-dimensional format so that other people can look and understand what you saw. And that's, if you think about it, it's crazy. It's wild. But I think with contemporary drawing, I mean, I know it's kind of, I like the sense that it's blown apart and people are really doing different things. And at NASCAD now, you can do a minor in drawing. 30 years ago, they didn't even teach it, so it's pretty good. Historically, you know, everyone goes on, I mean, the obvious one, everyone goes on about, of course, Da Vinci. My favorite is actually Albrecht Dürer. I love his drawings. They're just incredible. Historically, and I mean, Rembrandt, because I do a lot of pen and ink, and Rembrandt just, oh man, you look at those drawings. And I remember reading one time about, well, the reason they could draw like that is they drew for 6 hours every day for like 6 days a week since they were 14 or 15 years old. So I guess with that amount of practice, you should know how to do it. In a more contemporary world, I've always really loved Jim Dine's stuff. He does amazing. I love his really expressive botanicals. There's an artist from the UK, Elizabeth Blackadder, who does kind of contemporary botanicals, but they're very loose and free-flowing. Of a more kind of close nature, Lucy Chan, who did her graduate work at NASCAD, and she's now teaching at Emily Carr. She does really interesting things around issues of identity and place in the world, and does kind of figurative work and big installation drawings. I like Ed Peen's stuff, who works he teaches at Concordia now, does some interesting work. And there's other people out there. But, you know, sometimes I think if I heard that so-and-so was having an exhibition, would I hop on a plane to go see it? And if they're, like Jim Dine would probably be one of those people. If there was a big drawing show, I'd probably hop on a plane and go look at it. So it's really a wide range of stuff. And, you know, the other people who make really good drawings often are people who do sculpture. Like Rosemary Trockle, who does like really interesting drawings, but she does more installation kind of sculptural stuff. Yeah, so it's, it's not always stuff that people might expect that I like, but it's kind of wide-ranging. Well, there's a lot of things in life. There are aspects of it that are purely practical. So what comes first, the practical or some other kind of motivation? But in the practical is easier to identify. Is that I've always had a studio in my home, or currently now it's an adjacent building to the house. But I switched from painting to drawing when we lived in Newfoundland, and it did coincide with having babies. And what I would do to get studio time is I would hire a sitter for 2 days a week, and we lived in this 3-story, old Victorian side-by-side. And so my studio was on the top floor. And so as soon as Margie arrived in the morning, I was out of there. I was up on the 3rd floor. I guess I was living the whole Garrett thing. But anyways, that's another story. But there were 2 things. One is I was working in the home, so I didn't want to work with toxic material. And I had become increasingly aware of toxicity. I had friends who were printmakers who had become so sensitized to media through printmaking that they couldn't even work with acrylic paint anymore. And so I thought, if I'm going to work essentially in the home, and it's an old home, and so the air just circulates, I'm not going to use toxic materials. So unless you're spraying fixative, which I usually don't, so that wasn't an issue. The other practical thing is once you have, even though I had a babysitter, once you have little kids in your life, you actually have to be ready to put everything down and go and deal with the fact that they've just been sliding down the banister and have fallen off and broken their arm. So you can't say, well, excuse me, I'm painting wet on wet, and I can't take you to emergency right now because if I don't keep painting, my painting will be ruined. So part of it is that I had to have something that I could literally, I know that sounds really kind of straightforward, but it was that sense, okay, David fell off the banister and broke his arm. Oh my God, I got to take him to the Janeway. Put down my pencils, I'm in the car, I'm out of here. So that was sort of 2 of them. But the other thing is that I realized it was the transition from painting, other sort of subject matter, to drawing those. And because when I started drawing those, I thought, okay, I have found the place I want to be. And it's drawing this kind of thing, and it's working on paper. So it doesn't have, and I always think of, it's not painting with a big, huge P or something. It's drawing. I draw. So, I can, but what I found in drawing was I can do little tiny things, and then I can do monster things. So scale's not an issue. You can draw big, you can draw little. The other practical thing is storage. I was sitting with some friends last night, and one of them's a painter. She's had to rent a whole storage unit for all of her really big paintings that she can't sell. And I thought, oh, I'm so lucky. I can have hundreds of drawings just shoved into shelves, or the big stuff I can have. When we went to do this show, I unrolled the Devil's Purse drawings that had been rolled up for like 25 plus years. I was terrified because I thought maybe the mice had gotten into them. But anyways, the mice hadn't eaten them and they were okay. But I realized I had like 15 of these monster drawings in one sonotube that was in the corner of our basement. So I thought, oh, drawing's so practical. I can store it. It's okay. But part of it is that for me, I could come up with all kinds of things. And just kind of stray into feminist territory. I think I just defined a place in that big history of something like painting. It's hard. It's really difficult. And drawing just seemed like something that wasn't. I didn't carry so much historical weight. I don't know if, I mean, when I went to art school, it was the time of isms, you know, it was conceptualism and it was minimalism and it was, you know, abstract expressionism, and everybody carried their art forms, and oh God, what was the current thing, and you had to be doing the current thing. The world has exploded and it's so pluralistic now. I know it's a different world. But at that time it just felt, it felt onerous in a way, and drawing really felt like a place I could go and I could just be my own place. And I didn't carry so much historical weight. And I found out that and when I look back at my paintings now, I was never a painter. I just was not a good painter, trust me. It's really good that most of those are now destroyed. Because really, when I look back at my paintings, they were mostly about line. And I real drawings about line. And so if I want to work with line, well, I'm going to all this trouble to buy big tubes of paint and stretch canvas and all that stuff. Why don't I just pick up a piece of paper and make lines? So that's sort of the practical, and then the more kind of arty thing. So. You know, it's interesting because I get this question from a lot of students, especially the people. You see, at NASCAD we do film, we do design, so they do web design and all that stuff, and we have photography. So I get these students coming and going, I want to be a filmmaker. I go, why do I have to take drawing? And I go, okay, so when you make film, you're going to be making images that move over time, and you're going to be shooting three-dimensional images that then are going to have to be composed two-dimensionally. You're going to have to think compositionally. You're going to have to think Alfred Hitchcock. You're going to have to think tonally. So that's all about drawing, without all the kerfuffle and thousands of dollars worth of film. So, and you have to do storyboards. Hello, don't people in film still do storyboards? Of course they do. Well, you know how you do storyboards? You draw them. And so I tell them, I said, okay, let me give you really what drawing's about, and what I will teach you is I will teach you about space. Because in drawing, you teach people how to make space. So how, on a sheet of paper, do you make people think that something goes way back and something comes way forward? It's kind of good stuff to know how to do, right? If you're going to be it doesn't matter what you do, sculpture, painting, photography, it's a really good basis. And it's so cheap. You just need a pad of paper and a pencil. You don't have to invest so much money in it. Why wouldn't you want to do drawing? Now, Andrea Dorfman, I don't know if any of you know Andrea. She's a filmmaker, and she made Parsley Days, she made some other film, but she's kind of making a name for herself, and her films get shown. Andrea was a student of mine years ago at NASCAD. I had her in first year drawing, and then I had her in I think a second or third year painting class. She can draw like an angel, and she can paint even better. Anyways, I bumped into her a few years ago, and Andrea's been out now for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, and just doing film. And so I was commiserating with her. I said, Andrea, I get all these students and they want to do film and they don't want to learn how to draw. And you're a filmmaker. You did this stuff. What can I tell them? And she actually said, tell them they don't have to study film at all. What they have to do is learn how to draw and paint. So they have to understand images, and then they have to take a whole bunch of English literature courses because they have to understand stories and narrative. She goes, the filmmaking stuff, it's just technical. You can learn that anywhere. And she goes, sometime if I'm in town and you're teaching drawing, she said, I'd love to come in and talk to your students. And I went, yes. Now, I haven't taken her up on that, but I think that's why students need to know drawing, because you can have a sketchbook in your pack or in your back pocket. You can see something, you can stop, you can record it. Maybe you use it in some totally different media, but the thing is that drawing is so minimal at the same time as that it can be so full. But you can capture something, and I always have this experience. The last class of my first semester foundation students, I get a model. So we do some gesture drawings, and they do a extended pose. So it goes on for 2.5 hours. And they're supposed to bring in a good piece of paper and the media of their choice. So if they've really liked ink and wash or the charcoal or Conte or whatever. And it's a real challenge to get them through that thing, because in the 20 or 30 minutes of gesture, they make astounding drawings because they're kind of not thinking about it. And then you put them on a really nice piece of paper for 2.5 hours and they screw it up. But there is something about kind of that, it forces the eye and the hand to come together in kind of a quick way. And I'm not anti-intellectual, but sometimes in drawing, if you can circumvent your brain, you'll make much better drawings. No, it's funny though, I've kept all my, this is the other thing, your family will curse you when you die, but keep all your sketchbooks. Because one thing that I have found is that, for me anyways, I won't speak for other people, but art practice is a very circular thing. There's nothing, I think when I came out of art school, I had this thought that, okay, I do this and then it takes me here, and then I do that and it takes, and man, I'm just gonna keep shooting. But it doesn't work like that. It circles, it circles, it circles, it circles. And so, and for me, I tend to have a long, with ideas, it's a long gestation period. So with the dress drawings, I made the initial notations in a sketchbook in 1979, and I didn't actually start to work with that image until 10 years later. But it was kind of here, but it was in my journal sketchbooks. And when I look at my, quote, sketchbooks now, they're mostly journals, it's mostly writing. And so I jot down ideas, things, hear something, go to an artist presentation. So I keep that, and I've got sketchbooks from when I first started. And so I go back through them, and I find things that when I made that initial notation or wrote something, I obviously didn't know the full depth of it, and it's only years later when I circle back, I went, oh my God, there it is in my sketchbook, 10 years. It took me 10 years to figure out but that's the way it works for me. So it is this very circular thing, and it's Stephen Andrews, who was my mentor, when he was dying, he had liver cancer, he knew he was dying, but even before he was that ill, I remember getting letters from him, and I remember being so struck by them because Stephen would have been mid-70s, and he was going through a bad spell in the studio. And he wrote about it so beautifully, but it was kind of like, oh, the studio is still a struggle, and I'm going, it never gets better. But it's kind of an interesting lesson because it never does. Sorry about that. But it just keeps, but you keep circling, you keep circling, you keep circling. So keep journals, keep sketchbooks, jot down anything. I'm listening to the radio and there's a piece of music I like, so I write down, oh, I must check about, whatever. Or there's a book referenced, or, sometimes there's grocery lists, or, whatever. But keep all that stuff, because that really becomes the repository of where, for me anyways, from where the more finished the studio comes from. And whenever I've and we all have those periods of artist block or writer's block or whatever art form you do, and they're awful. I don't know if anyone here is, I'm sure some of you experience them. And people have different strategies, but the way I've always done is even though they might be really awful, I just keep making stuff, even though it all gets torn up. That's just my methodology, but I can go back to sketchbooks and journals and go, look, there's an idea that I never did anything with. Maybe I'll tackle that. So, yeah, I do. Lots and lots of them. I'm kind of set on the high standards of now. But the interesting thing with paper is it will last if it's properly looked after. But paper is a bit like textiles. If they're improperly looked after, they won't last. And I had this interesting, I thought it was mildly interesting, a couple of years ago, because the gallery that, the commercial gallery in Halifax, Studio 21, that has my stuff, had a little diptych and it was framed. And this woman came in, she was 80, and she wanted to buy this work on paper. But she told the gallery staff that she wanted to take it out of the frame and she was going to put it on a wall in her apartment where it got hit by direct sunlight for a good portion of every day. So the gallery people, being conscientious gallery people, were hesitant to sell to her because that, even though I use, to the best of my knowledge, permanent inks in the paper, in that situation, that drawing will be destroyed over a length of time. And I said, if she loves the drawing that much, and I said, she probably doesn't have a whole lot of years left. She'll get to enjoy it for the rest of the time she's here. But that work will be substantially deteriorated over that period of time because it's not been properly. So yes, it's just like if you look after your bulbs in your garden, they'll come up year after year if they don't get flooded or rot or something. So there's always that potential. And the other thing I was telling students just a couple of days ago, there was at Dalhousie a few years ago an exhibition of Betty Goodwin prints from the National Gallery. And Betty Goodwin just died, within the last year or something. And this show was only allowed to go, I think, to like 4 galleries. They could only be humidity, like climate-controlled galleries. And with National Gallery shows, their own installers come and install. They set the lights. You don't touch anything. But the show at Dal was the last venue. And when that work went back to the National Gallery, it was going to be put back in storage drawers and was not going to be allowed to have any light on it for 5 years. Because, of course, the National Gallery is interested in conserving their work. So yes, conservators talk about, hundreds of years. We talk in shorter lifespans. But paper treated badly will deteriorate. Treated well, it will continue. But quite frankly, I'm too in love with materials. I'm too much of a material girl to work on. I mean, I hate newsprint. I hate it. It's slippery, and students come in and they come in with graphite on newsprint. Oh, I can't even stand the sound of it. It's just so awful. Use cartridge paper or something. But I love good paper. I mean, I collect the stuff. No, I don't work on that. I might work on that, yeah. But the other thing I do with good paper is, and again, students are horrified sometimes when you hold up a piece of paper and tell them how much you paid for it. But I always, when I buy paper, like when I go to Toronto, I'll buy hundreds of dollars worth of Japanese paper. But there's one piece of paper in my storage drawers that I think I've had for 25 years because I can't forget that it cost me $28. And as long as I remember, so it is a contradiction, because as long as I remember how much it cost, if it was an expensive piece of paper, I don't work on it because I'll probably screw it up because I just can't forget that it cost me $28. So I recommend to students that, at the beginning of the year when they still have money from their student loan, go out and buy all the paper they want for the year, and they'll forget what the bill was and store it, and then you won't be so nervous about working on a really beautiful piece of paper. Life is too short to work on lousy paper. I guess that's my motto. I think that's absolutely true. And I also, you know, to go back to something I said earlier, when I, you know, was a bum sitting in that chair as a 19-year-old, the art world was a very different place. And I think I personally think it's a better place now. I think because of that DIY stuff now, it sometimes generates some kind of bad art. But I think there's a kind of hierarchy that has in some ways maybe broken down a bit. I think some of that was the impact of feminism, which was kind of at the time that I was coming through art school. I mean, reading Lucy Lepard and going and listening to her talk and so on and so forth. But I think there has been a kind of breaking down, and I think that whole pluralistic. There's so many different things happening, and people can have so many different ways of exploring a kind of creative urge, that I think that's absolutely true. And it's when I met with your conservator today, I have a mother-in-law at the Drew who's 97, and when I go visit her, I'm just I'm looking at these rug hookings, and they're from the 30s or 40s, and they're just amazing. And then last night with a group of friends, there's been, I don't know if people know Nancy Adele's work, but she was fairly well known in Nova Scotia, and she painted and did printmaking, but she did hooked rugs, but did this very kind of contemporary imagery in hooked rug form. And it just made me think today, because we saw this documentary film on Nancy, and just the way that she had taken rug hooking and used it just as another media, and had made these really amazing pieces. So I think I like that that's happening, and I think it is happening, and I think it's a good, generally a good thing. I mean, you could talk about, I mean, various people talk about, I mean, we've lived through the end of art, so there's, but you just go ahead and make whatever it is you feel driven to make. And yeah, that's probably not a very good answer, is it? No. But I think it is. But I think there's a lot of other factors that have made that happen. Oh, come on. I used to sit there and I had questions that I never asked, and I kicked myself afterwards. Like, why didn't I ask her? So surely you got another question or two. Absolutely. And I think in some ways, I think it links a bit with Jemmy's question. I think there are so many ways to make art. I mean, and I always, I talk a lot to students about, on one hand, we have theory, and then we have practice, and we all find ourselves somewhere on that continuum. So there's people who conceptualize, and then they get other people to actually make the work. And then there's people like me who are hanging out in the practice end of things. Because if you look at these drawings, unless you're a drawer, you might not know, but there's hours and hours, and because I work with, I'm somewhere back in the 1600s, because I don't work with feather cut quills anymore, but I work with like metal dip pens is what I work with. And it is very meditative, and it builds, and it builds. And the other thing that has happened to me vis-a-vis drawing is, and I think that's what I loved about the Berger piece, is that at some point the drawing starts to talk to you. So at some point in the process, the drawing starts to tell you what you need to do next. So it becomes this, it's not a relationship with your drawing, but I can be in the studio, well, I had a problem with my shoulder, and I went to a massage therapist, and she goes, well, why do you think your rotator cuff is so inflamed? I said, because I hunched over my drawing board for 5 hours yesterday. She went, you drew for 5 hours? And I went, well, yeah, that's what I do. But I realized I'd kind of hitched my shoulders, so now I'm drawing a whole different way. But that's what I do. I go to the studio, and hours later I go get a cup of tea, and then I go back. And it is very meditative. And I think those of us who have practices like that, is we don't have to work that way. There's other ways of working, but we've chosen that because there is something in that process that is meaningful to us. And it is this kind of head, heart, and hand thing. So I often, people say, well, why did you do, surely if you'd done 2 Devil's Purses drawings, like, why did you do so many of them? Like, did you really have to do that many? But the process of drawing to me is that, like, when I saw those Devil's Purses, I knew I had to draw them, but I didn't know why I had to draw them. So through the drawing of them, I came to understand the why. And once I understood the why, I didn't have to draw anymore. So that's part of, so I'm very process, yeah. No. But I teach. So I'm not really telling you the truth when I say that. I teach, so I'm in the world where I work with students like you. And I think when someone once said, well, when do you think you'll stop teaching? And I said, I think I'll stop teaching when students stop surprising me. And I still am surprised by students. I mean, sometimes I've been given the same assignment for 20 years, and there's a student that brings in a drawing, and it's like nothing I've ever seen. And so it's great. I love it. So, and, you know, I'm a member of Visual Arts Nova Scotia, and I'm a member of another artist and I set up this kind of ad hoc Monday figure drawing class that's a drop-in. It's not for students, it's for, you know, art practitioners or faculty or whatever. So I do some stuff like that, but my studio is a very, very private place. I have friends who hire assistants, and I have people who work collaboratively, but that's not my process. I know it's a long time ago, but I vaguely remember my student years, and I think that, I don't know if it's still the same way, but the fine arts were kind of an entity unto themselves when I was here. You didn't mix and mingle a lot with the rest of the campus. That's because we had so much work to do. We were always next door. But there was as a student, there was a great deal, I think, of camaraderie and support that came from the group. I think the group was very important as a student because it becomes a support thing. And the other thing is a class when you first start studying art, and I know it's a cliche, but I say it to students, you'll learn as much from your peer group as you will from me, because everybody solves an assignment differently. So when you see all that range of how people respond to any given assignment, it helps you think, oh my gosh, there's so many ways. It's not like some other subject areas. So for me, no, the studio is like, I don't want anyone in there chatting or bothering me. The cat comes in, the dog, except the cat always wants to sit on my drawing, which is a bit irritating. So then he gets booted out, but sometimes the dog comes in, and she sits there quietly. But sometimes when I get bored, I'll sketch them in my sketchbook, because of course dogs and cats just sleep all day. They're great drawing subjects because they just never move much. But I think it's really important as a student. I think that's one of the big reasons for coming into a group of people and studying art together, because you can learn an awful lot from one another. But as I'd like to think of myself as a mature artist, my studio time is kind of precious, and it's very, very solitary. I think that's why I still like to do a bit of teaching, so I don't go kind of totally cuckoo. I I'll often have a couple things going simultaneously, especially with the bigger stuff, because I'd have two panels going. But what I actually do is that it's you know, it's the tyranny of the pure white sheet of paper. So I always start. I'll go through a couple of days where I simply collage a bunch of sheets. I mean, and because I work in series, I'll have some sort of vague idea, maybe, maybe not. But I'll actually just do a whole bunch of collage, and then I'll stick it in the drawer. And then, like with these drawings, as an example, the background paper is, like, you know, the streaky stuff, the really beautiful part, is, it's a sheet of washi. And I was at the Japanese paper place, and there were 5 sheets of this paper. And it's a hand-dyed washi that was made by this Japanese guy. And they were the last 5 sheets anywhere. So, of course, you buy the last 5 sheets, right? So I came home, and they're collaged on the Spanish paper. Those sat in my drawers for about 6 years. And part of it was the washi was so beautiful. I thought maybe I should just exhibit just the paper, because the paper's so lovely. Anyways, when this particular image came to mind, I went, bingo, and I got that out. So the process, again, is it's not so straightforward that I go, oh, I want to draw that, oh, I'll get that out and do it. It's kind of bringing together these things. And when I used to go to the museum and draw, I always took a piece of paper that had some kind of collage on it. And I've got, you know, big folders full of torn bits and pieces of paper, and when a drawing doesn't work, I tear it up. And so in some of my work, there's old drawings that get recycled into new drawings. So I think I'm really ecological in my approach. I had this idea one time that I'd spend the first half of my life making all this stuff, and I'd spend the second, except you never know what the second half is going to be, right? But I'd take the second half and I'd distill it all to one piece, because it all, you know, anyways, it's just one of those kind of things. But no, it's a really kind of odd, kind of rolling thing. And sometimes I look at some of these drawings in this show, I'm not being disingenuous. I have no idea how I did it. Like if you asked me, okay, how did you exactly make that drawing? I'd go, yikes, because I kind of sometimes don't remember. I mean, I know the general things, but the actual, I kind of forget for older stuff. So I always start with a dirty surface, is what I say. Yeah, I have, and there are some things that because of them, I'm trying to think if there's anything in this show. I don't think so, particularly in this show, but yeah, I have worked from photographs in the past, and I've got nothing against working with photographs. There were some dead birds that I drew, and it was again one of those things. The family wanted the dead birds out of the freezer, so I did photograph them, and then I worked from the photographs, because it sort of seemed wasteful just to throw them, put them in the compost bin and not do something with them. So, but I did photograph them and then drew them.